There is a mountain in Colorado that looks like every other mountain in Colorado. It has trees, it has rock, it has snow at the top. From the highway, you would drive right past it without a second thought. But deep inside that mountain, carved into solid granite, built to survive a nuclear blast, sealed behind a pair of blast doors that each weigh 25 tons, sits one of the most sophisticated and secretive command centers ever built by human hands. It has its own power supply, its own water supply, its own fuel reserves, its own air filtration system, and its own internal communication network that ties directly into the defense grid of the entire United States. The people who work inside it are responsible for watching every single square mile of North American airspace, every ballistic missile launch on the planet, every satellite moving through low Earth orbit, every unidentified object approaching the continental United States from any direction at any speed. They track things most people do not know exist. They respond to situations most people will never hear about. And they do all of it from inside a hollowed-out mountain, sitting on springs, sealed inside a box, with blast doors that can stop a nuclear shockwave. This is Cheyenne Mountain. This is the story of what is actually inside it, what it does, how it was built, why it was built that way, and what the people who work there experience every single day they walk through those tunnels and seal the world shut behind them. If this kind of story is what you come here for, subscribe right now and hit that bell, because we go deep on subjects like this every single week, and you do not want to miss a single one. Let us start at the very beginning, because to understand why the United States decided to build a military command center inside a mountain, you have to understand the world as it existed in the early 1950s. The Soviet Union had just successfully tested a nuclear weapon in 1949. That single event changed everything. It changed American defense strategy, American foreign policy, American military architecture, and the way the United States thought about its own survival. Before that test, the assumption was that only America had the bomb. After that test, the assumption became that any American city, any American military base, any command center located above ground and within range of a Soviet bomber or missile was potentially a target. And in the early years of the Cold War, the bomber was the primary delivery threat. Soviet long-range bombers, specifically the Tu-4 and later the Tu-95, were capable of reaching North American territory. If they ever launched a coordinated strike against the United States, the first targets would almost certainly include the radar stations, the command centers, and the communication hubs that allowed the American military to see what was coming and respond to it. In other words, the very facilities designed to detect and defend against a nuclear attack would themselves be among the first things destroyed in a nuclear attack. The military recognized this problem clearly. If you want a system that can survive a first strike and still respond, you cannot build it in a glass office building in Washington. You cannot build it on a flat military base in the middle of the open plains. You need something that can take a hit. You need something buried. You need something hardened. And you need something big enough to house the people and equipment necessary to actually run a continental air defense operation. The search for a location began in earnest in the mid-1950s. The requirements were specific and demanding. The facility needed to be far enough inland that it was out of immediate range of carrier-based aircraft. It needed to be deep enough underground to withstand the overpressure of a... There is a mountain in Colorado that looks like every other mountain in Colorado. It has trees, it has rock, it has snow at the top. From the highway, you would drive right past it without a second thought. But deep inside that mountain, carved into solid granite, built to survive a nuclear blast, sealed behind a pair of blast doors that each weigh 25 tons, sits one of the most sophisticated and secretive command centers ever built by human hands. It has its own power supply, its own water supply, its own fuel reserves, its own air filtration system, and its own internal communication network that ties directly into the defense grid of the entire United States. The people who work inside it are responsible for watching every single square mile of North American airspace, every ballistic missile launch on the planet, every satellite moving through low Earth orbit, every unidentified object approaching the continental United States from any direction at any speed. They track things most people do not know exist. They respond to situations most people will never hear about. And they do all of it from inside a hollowed-out mountain, sitting on springs, sealed inside a box, with blast doors that can stop a nuclear shockwave. This is Cheyenne Mountain. This is the story of what is actually inside it, what it does, how it was built, why it was built that way, and what the people who work there experience every single day they walk through those tunnels and seal the world shut behind them. If this kind of story is what you come here for, subscribe right now and hit that bell, because we go deep on subjects like this every single week, and you do not want to miss a single one. Let us start at the very beginning, because to understand why the United States decided to build a military command center inside a mountain, you have to understand the world as it existed in the early 1950s. The Soviet Union had just successfully tested a nuclear weapon in 1949. That single event changed everything. It changed American defense strategy, American foreign policy, American military architecture, and the way the United States thought about its own survival. Before that test, the assumption was that only America had the bomb. After that test, the assumption became that any American city, any American military base, any command center located above ground and within range of a Soviet bomber or missile was potentially a target. And in the early years of the Cold War, the bomber was the primary delivery threat. Soviet long-range bombers, specifically the Tu-4 and later the Tu-95, were capable of reaching North American territory. If they ever launched a coordinated strike against the United States, the first targets would almost certainly include the radar stations, the command centers, and the communication hubs that allowed the American military to see what was coming and respond to it. In other words, the very facilities designed to detect and defend against a nuclear attack would themselves be among the first things destroyed in a nuclear attack. The military recognized this problem clearly. If you want a system that can survive a first strike and still respond, you cannot build it in a glass office building in Washington. You cannot build it on a flat military base in the middle of the open plains. You need something that can take a hit. You need something buried. You need something hardened. And you need something big enough to house the people and equipment necessary to actually run a continental air defense operation. The search for a location began in earnest in the mid-1950s. The requirements were specific and demanding. The facility needed to be far enough inland that it was out of immediate range of carrier-based aircraft. It needed to be deep enough underground to withstand the overpressure of a nearby nuclear detonation. It needed to have enough internal volume to house hundreds of personnel, massive computer and communications equipment, and all of the life support systems necessary to keep people alive and functioning for extended periods without any connection to the outside world. It also needed to be close enough to existing infrastructure, roads, rail lines, power grids, that building it would actually be feasible. Cheyenne Mountain, located just southwest of Colorado Springs, Colorado, met every single one of those criteria. The granite that made up the mountain was among the hardest, most stable rock formations in the United States. The mountain sat roughly 1,700 miles from both coasts. Colorado Springs was already home to significant military infrastructure, including Fort Carson and what would become Peterson Air Force Base. And the mountain itself provided a natural overhead cover of solid rock that no above-ground structure could ever replicate. The decision was made. In 1961, construction began. And what the engineers and construction workers who showed up at Cheyenne Mountain in 1961 faced was a project unlike almost anything that had ever been attempted in American history. To build a command center inside a mountain, you first have to hollow out the mountain. That process began with drilling and blasting. Workers used conventional tunnel boring techniques combined with controlled explosive charges to carve through the granite interior of Cheyenne Mountain. Over the course of construction, they removed approximately 700,000 tons of rock. That is not a typo. 700,000 tons of solid granite blasted, broken, loaded, and hauled out of the mountain over a period of roughly 3 years. The main excavation created a series of tunnels and chambers that form the internal layout of the complex. The primary complex itself consists of 15 separate freestanding steel buildings constructed inside the mountain's caverns. These are not rooms carved into rock. These are actual buildings, multi-story steel frame structures assembled inside the excavated chambers of the mountain. The largest of these buildings is 3 stories tall. The buildings are connected by corridors and tunnels. The entire interior complex covers approximately 4.5 acres of underground space. Think about that. 4.5 acres of enclosed, climate-controlled, pressurized, fully operational military facility sitting inside a mountain under hundreds of feet of solid rock. The complex sits roughly 2,000 feet below the summit of Cheyenne Mountain. The amount of granite above the facility at its deepest point is sufficient to absorb a significant nuclear detonation. The designers calculated that the facility could survive a nuclear explosion of several megatons detonating relatively close to the mountain and still remain operational. But the rock overhead was only part of the hardening solution. The steel buildings inside the mountain are not bolted to the rock. They are not attached to the floor of the chambers. They sit on springs. Specifically, Each of the 15 buildings rests on a system of large steel springs, over 1,000 of them total across the complex. These springs are not small. They are industrial-scale coil springs, each one roughly the size and weight of a small car. The purpose of these springs is to isolate the buildings from the shock wave that would travel through the rock in the event of a nearby nuclear detonation. When a nuclear weapon explodes near a mountain, the explosion sends a compression wave through the rock at enormous speed. That wave can shatter equipment, knock out electronics, injure personnel, and destroy structures that are rigidly connected to the surrounding rock. By placing every building in the complex on springs, the designers ensured that even if the mountain shook violently, the buildings inside would bounce rather than break. The springs would absorb the worst of the movement and protect the equipment and people inside from the most damaging effects. This engineering solution was tested and validated through extensive modeling and calculation. It was one of the most sophisticated seismic isolation systems ever built at the time of construction, and it remains an engineering achievement worth studying even by modern standards. The blast doors are another element of the complex that deserves serious attention because they are genuinely impressive in a way that photographs do not fully capture. The North Portal, the main entrance tunnel, runs roughly 1,700 feet through the rock from the surface to the interior complex. At 2 points along this tunnel sit the blast doors. Each blast door is constructed from solid steel. Each weighs approximately 25 tons. They are 3 feet thick. They swing on hinges and can be sealed from the inside. When those doors are closed, they form a seal capable of withstanding the pressure wave from a nuclear detonation. They are not meant to be pretty. They are not designed for convenience. They are designed for one purpose only, to keep everything on the other side of them alive and operational, while the world outside potentially ends. The tunnel itself serves a second protective function beyond just providing a path to the entrance. The tunnel is not straight. It bends. This is intentional. A straight tunnel running from the surface directly into the complex would act as a pipe, channeling blast pressure and heat directly into the facility. By incorporating a curve in the tunnel, the designers ensured that any pressure or thermal energy entering from the outside would be deflected and absorbed before it reached the blast doors themselves. Every single element of this design reflects the same underlying philosophy. Think about every way this could fail. Then build it so that failure becomes as unlikely as physics allows. Construction was completed, and the facility was formally activated on February 6, 1966. On that date, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD, officially transferred its operations into Cheyenne Mountain. From that point forward, the mountain was open for business, and the business it was in was watching the entire sky above North America and being ready to respond to anything that came through it. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is a binational organization. That means it is operated jointly by the United States and Canada. This is worth pausing on for a moment because it is unusual and significant. The defense of North American airspace is not a solo American operation. It is a shared mission between two countries that have maintained one of the longest undefended borders in the world and one of the closest military partnerships in history. NORAD was formally established in 1958, before Cheyenne Mountain was built, as a response to the growing Soviet bomber threat. The agreement created a unified command structure in which the commander of NORAD is always an American four-star general or admiral, while the deputy commander is always a Canadian. This arrangement has been renewed and updated multiple times over the decades, and it remains in place today. When Cheyenne Mountain became operational, it became the physical home of NORAD's command function. The technology installed inside the mountain in those early years was, for its time, extraordinary. The computing systems that first went into Cheyenne Mountain occupied entire rooms and could perform calculations at speeds that were genuinely unprecedented in 1966. They were connected by communications lines to radar stations spread across the Arctic, across the Canadian North, and across the continental United States. The DEW line, the Distant Early Warning Line, was a chain of radar stations stretching across the Arctic that gave NORAD its first detection capability for incoming Soviet bombers. The information from those radar stations fed back to Cheyenne Mountain, where operators would see the picture of what was in the sky and make decisions about what to do about it. The early operators inside the mountain worked with big screens, with plotters, with communication systems that required physical operators sitting at boards, moving symbols, talking into headsets. The computing power was impressive for the era, but limited by modern standards. Decisions moved through chains of command. Information moved through voice communications. The entire system was designed to compress the time between detection and response as much as technology allowed, because in a nuclear attack scenario, time measured in minutes mattered enormously. Over the following decades, the technology inside Cheyenne Mountain evolved continuously. As computing became more powerful, as software became more sophisticated, as sensor networks became more comprehensive and more reliable, the capability of the facility grew with it. The 1970s brought significant upgrades to the computing systems. The 1980s brought new generations of display technology and expanded space surveillance capability. The 1990s brought the integration of digital networks and the beginning of the transition to software-based tracking and analysis systems. But through all of those technological generations, the physical facility remained essentially the same. The mountain, the tunnels, the blast doors, the springs, the 15 buildings, the life support systems. The bones of the complex built in the early 1960s remained the foundation of everything that came after. Let us talk about what the people who work inside Cheyenne Mountain actually experience when they show up for a shift, because the physical and psychological reality of working inside a sealed mountain is something that most people have never thought about and would find genuinely surprising. The first thing you notice when you enter the North Portal is the change in environment. You go from the open air of Colorado, with its sky and light and movement, into a tunnel carved from rock. The air inside the tunnel is cooler than the outside air and has a particular quality to it. A stillness, a heaviness, an absence of wind that reminds you immediately that you are going underground. The tunnel runs for nearly a third of a mile through the mountain. Walking or riding in a vehicle through that tunnel, watching the circle of daylight behind you shrink and disappear, is an experience that settles into you in a quiet but unmistakable way. You are going inside. You are going where natural light does not reach, where weather does not exist, where the sounds of the outside world cannot penetrate. By the time you reach the blast doors, you are fully inside the mountain. The doors can be open or closed, depending on the operational status of the facility. When they are open, you pass through them and continue into the complex. When they are closed, they fill the tunnel completely, and the reality of what this place is built to do becomes impossible to ignore. Beyond the blast doors, you enter the interior complex. And here is where it becomes genuinely surreal for most people who see it for the first time. Because what you encounter inside this hollowed-out mountain is not a cave. It is not a bunker in the traditional sense of a low-ceilinged, dimly lit, cramped underground space. It is a full-scale working facility with corridors, offices, equipment rooms, meeting spaces, break rooms, and operational floors that look, in terms of their basic functionality, like any other military command and control facility you might find above ground. The 15 buildings stand inside the excavated chambers of the mountain, their steel frames rising 2 and 3 stories within the rock caverns that surround them. The ceilings of the chambers are the exposed rock of the mountain itself, bolted and reinforced with rock bolts but still recognizably granite, still carrying the marks of the drilling and blasting that created the space. Walking between buildings, you walk through tunnels and corridors cut into the rock, and in those corridors the mountain is fully present. You are inside it. You are surrounded by it. And yet inside the buildings, inside the operational spaces where the mission happens every day, the facility feels, in many ways, like an office. That contrast between the surreal exterior reality of being inside a mountain sealed behind 25-ton blast doors and the interior reality of a working office environment with computers and desks and briefings and shift changes is one of the defining experiences that people who have worked at Cheyenne Mountain consistently describe. The air inside is managed by a sophisticated filtration and pressurization system. This system was one of the critical life support elements designed into the facility from the beginning. In the event of a nuclear, biological, or chemical threat from outside, the facility can seal itself and maintain its own internal atmosphere, filtering incoming air through systems designed to remove contaminants and maintain breathable conditions for the personnel inside. The pressurization system also serves to prevent outside air, potentially contaminated, from infiltrating the complex. The facility maintains a slightly positive internal pressure, meaning air flows outward through any gap rather than inward, reducing the risk of contamination entering even through imperfect seals. Water comes from an underground reservoir inside the mountain itself. The complex has its own water supply, stored in large tanks carved from the rock, sufficient to support the operation for an extended period without any external connection. Fuel for the backup power generators is stored inside the mountain, in tanks that can keep the facility running independently for a significant period. The power systems are another element worth understanding in detail. Cheyenne Mountain does not rely solely on the commercial power grid. It cannot afford to. A nuclear detonation or a directed attack on infrastructure could take down commercial power over a wide region, and a command center that loses power loses its mission. The complex has its own diesel generators capable of powering the entire facility independently. There are multiple generators, and the system is designed so that the failure of any single generator does not take down the whole complex. The generators are large, serious industrial machines that can carry the full electrical load of 15 buildings full of sensitive electronics and life support systems. Starting those generators and transitioning the facility from grid power to internal power is a procedure that can be executed quickly when the operational situation demands it. And beyond the generators, beyond the water tanks, beyond the air filtration system, the facility has stockpiles of food and supplies designed to support extended operations with no contact with the outside world. This is what it means to be a self-sustaining command center. Not just having a strong building. Having everything you need to keep people alive and mission-capable inside that building for as long as the situation requires. Now let us talk about what the facility actually does. Because the mission of Cheyenne Mountain has evolved considerably over the decades, and is broader and more technically sophisticated than most people realize. The core original mission was aerospace warning and aerospace control. Aerospace warning means detecting and tracking any airborne threat to North America, whether from bombers, cruise missiles, or ballistic missiles. Aerospace control means managing the response to any confirmed threat, coordinating with interceptor aircraft, with missile defense systems, and with the National Command Authority to determine and execute the appropriate response. But over time, the mission expanded in two significant directions. Space surveillance and maritime warning were added to the core aerospace mission, reflecting the growing importance of the space domain and the recognition that threats could arrive through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Space surveillance means tracking every artificial object in Earth orbit. There are thousands of them, from functioning satellites to dead satellites to rocket bodies to debris fragments the size of a softball. All of them are tracked. All of them have their positions updated continuously. This matters because a new object that appears in orbit, one that was not there in the last tracking cycle, is a potential threat. A weapon deployed in orbit, a satellite maneuvered to interfere with American systems, a re-entry vehicle released from a previously benign-appearing spacecraft. All of these are scenarios that space surveillance is designed to detect and characterize. Maritime warning involves integrating information from multiple intelligence and sensor sources to identify any unusual naval activities by foreign powers that could indicate preparation for or execution of an attack. The combination of these mission areas means that on any given day inside Cheyenne Mountain, the operators are watching the sky, watching space, watching the ocean approaches to North America, and integrating all of that information into a single coherent picture of the threat environment. That picture is updated continuously, in real time, around the clock, every day of the year, including holidays, including nights when the rest of the world is asleep, including moments of international calm when nothing appears to be happening and the work still goes on, because the commitment to never being surprised is absolute and unconditional. The command structure inside Cheyenne Mountain is military to its core. The facility operates on a shift schedule, with crews rotating through the operational positions. Each crew is led by a senior officer, typically a general or flag officer, who serves as the battle staff director during their shift. Supporting that officer is a battle staff made up of representatives from each of the mission areas: aerospace warning, aerospace control, space surveillance, maritime warning, and the intelligence function that ties all of those threads together. When something happens, when a new track appears on a screen that requires evaluation, when a missile launch is detected somewhere in the world, when a radar contact behaves in a way that demands attention, the battle staff moves. Information flows. Assessments are made. Communications go out. The chain of command activates, and if the situation is serious enough, the information moves up through the most sensitive and well-protected communication channels in the American military to the people who hold the highest authority in the land. Because ultimately, that is what Cheyenne Mountain exists to do. Not just to see what is happening, but to get that information to the people who need it, with enough time and enough clarity that the right decisions can be made before the moment of irreversible consequence arrives. Let us talk about some of the specific moments in the history of Cheyenne Mountain that tested the facility, its people, and its systems in ways that went beyond routine operations. Because the history of this facility is not all quiet nights and uneventful shifts. There have been moments inside that mountain that carried the genuine weight of potential catastrophe. Moments where the difference between the right decision and the wrong decision was measured in minutes, and where the consequences of error were almost unimaginable. The most well-documented and sobering category of incidents in NORAD history involves false alarms. Situations where the systems indicated an incoming missile attack that turned out not to be real. These incidents are not widely known to the general public, but among people who study nuclear strategy and command and control, they are deeply important case studies in how close the world has come to catastrophic decisions based on faulty information. In November of 1979, a training tape containing a simulated Soviet nuclear attack was accidentally loaded into the NORAD computers during live operations. For several minutes, operators inside Cheyenne Mountain were looking at screens that appeared to show a massive incoming Soviet missile strike against the United States. Interceptor aircraft were scrambled. The National Command Authority was alerted. The entire apparatus of American nuclear response began to activate. It took several minutes of frantic cross-checking before it was determined that the attack was not real, that the screens were showing a training scenario, not actual missile tracks. Those minutes, during which the decision about whether to launch a retaliatory strike was on the table, are among the most harrowing minutes in Cold War history. Less than a year later, in June of 1980, a faulty computer chip inside Cheyenne Mountain systems caused similar alerts. A single failed component in the communication system caused the system to generate random attack warning data. Again, interceptors were scrambled. Again, the National Command Authority was notified. Again, it was determined after urgent checking that no attack was actually incoming. These incidents led to significant changes in the procedures and redundancies built into the warning and assessment process. They demonstrated, at enormous cost to everyone's blood pressure, that the systems were not infallible, that human judgment and redundant verification remained absolutely essential, even when the most sophisticated technology in the world was telling you something very specific and very alarming. They also demonstrated something important about the people inside Cheyenne Mountain. In both incidents, under conditions of extreme pressure, with systems showing what appeared to be real attacks, with every instinct for self-preservation and response pushing in the direction of action, the people in that facility did not simply act on the first information they received. They checked, they verified, they cross-referenced, they demanded confirmation before allowing the situation to escalate to the point of no return. That discipline, that commitment to verification even under pressure, is one of the most important things about how Cheyenne Mountain operates. And it is a characteristic that has been deliberately trained and reinforced since the earliest days of the facility's operation. The year 1983 brought another moment of extraordinary tension, this one on the Soviet side rather than the American side, but directly connected to the Cheyenne Mountain mission. On September 26, 1983, a Soviet early warning system called OKO indicated that the United States had launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles at the Soviet Union. The officer on duty that night, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, was required by protocol to report this as a confirmed attack and initiate the Soviet response process. Instead, he reported it as a system malfunction. His reasoning was partly intuition and partly logic. He did not believe the United States would begin a nuclear war with only 5 missiles. A real first strike would involve hundreds. He trusted his judgment over his instruments. He was right. The alert was caused by a malfunction in the Soviet satellite system. No American missiles had been launched. Petrov's decision likely prevented a Soviet retaliatory strike that would have killed tens of millions of people. The parallel to the American false alarm incidents of 1979 and 1980 is unmistakable. The people watching the screens, on both sides of the Cold War divide, understood that the worst possible outcome of their job was not missing a real attack. It was responding to a false one. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, that understanding is woven into everything. Into the training, into the procedures, into the culture of the people who serve there. The mission is to see clearly and to report accurately. The mission is not simply to act. Beyond the false alarm incidents, Cheyenne Mountain has tracked and responded to real-world crises too numerous to fully catalog here. Every major international incident involving potential aerospace threats to North America, every significant military operation that raised the possibility of escalation, every unexplained radar contact or unusual aircraft track over the past half-century, has passed through the awareness of the people and systems in that mountain. The Gulf War of 1991 brought Scud missile launches that required rapid assessment of trajectories and potential threats. The September 11th attacks of 2001 created an immediate and extraordinary demand on NORAD and Cheyenne Mountain, as the nature of the threat, which was not missiles but hijacked commercial aircraft, required rapid adaptation of procedures and authorities that had been built around a different kind of attack entirely. The response to September 11th, the immediate grounding of all civilian air traffic over the United States, the scrambling of fighter aircraft to patrol major cities, the establishment of combat air patrol over Washington and New York, all of that was coordinated through and supported by the systems and the people of this mission. Following September 11th, the NORAD mission expanded explicitly to include the internal airspace threat, the possibility of an attack conducted not from outside the country by a foreign military, but from within the country using civilian aircraft as weapons. This was a fundamental expansion of the mission and required significant adjustments to authorities, procedures, and coordination with civilian aviation authorities. Let us talk about the physical experience of working inside this mountain over longer periods, because it is one thing to describe the facility in terms of its technical specifications and its historical moments. It is another to understand what it is like to be a human being working inside it day after day. People who have served extended tours at Cheyenne Mountain consistently describe a process of adaptation. In the beginning, the environment is striking. The walk through the tunnel, the blast doors, the springs under the buildings, the exposed granite of the cavern ceilings. All of it demands your attention and your awareness in a way that an above-ground office never would. You are conscious, in a way that becomes less urgent but never entirely disappears, that you are inside a mountain designed to survive a nuclear war. Over time, most people describe settling into the work in a way that pushes the unusual environment to the background. The mission becomes the foreground. The screens, the data, the procedures, the people on your crew, the rhythm of the shift schedule, these become the texture of daily experience, in the same way they would in any intensive operational job. But the background never fully disappears. There are moments, quiet moments at the end of a night shift, or a particular instant when you look up from your screen and the granite ceiling of the cavern is directly above you, when the full reality of where you are and why it was built reasserts itself. And in those moments, people describe a feeling that is hard to articulate, but worth trying to capture. It is something between awe and gravity. A recognition that this place, this hollowed-out mountain with its spring-mounted buildings and its blast doors and its continuous watch, is a physical expression of the most serious question that human civilization has faced in its entire existence. Which is this: how do you prevent the end of everything? The social dimension of working inside Cheyenne Mountain is also worth understanding. The facility operates on a shift schedule, which means that at any given moment, part of the staff is working and part is off-duty. The off-duty periods inside the mountain are not spent outdoors, obviously. They are spent in the break areas, the dining facilities, the recreational spaces that the facility maintains to keep its people functional and mentally healthy over extended operational periods. The relationships that form among crew members working in this environment are intense in the way that relationships formed under shared unusual circumstances tend to be. You are spending long hours together in a sealed environment doing work that demands absolute attention and carries extraordinary stakes. The bonds formed in that context are real and lasting. Former Cheyenne Mountain personnel consistently describe those relationships as among the most significant of their professional lives. There is also a particular kind of professional pride that develops among the people of this mission. They know what they do. They know why it matters. They know that their work, done well, contributes to the security of an entire continent. That knowledge is not abstract for them. It is lived in the daily work of every shift, in the continuous updating of the track picture, in the rigorous application of procedures designed to prevent catastrophic error. Now let us address an important chapter in the history of Cheyenne Mountain, because in 2006, something happened that surprised a lot of people who were paying attention. NORAD announced that it was transitioning its primary operations out of Cheyenne Mountain and into a new facility, the Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs. The reason given was operational efficiency and modernization. The new facility at Peterson offered more space, more modern infrastructure, and easier access for the expanded range of personnel and systems that the modern NORAD and United States Northern Command mission required. United States Northern Command, or USNORTHCOM, is the combatant command responsible for the defense of the continental United States. It was established after September 11, 2001, and its headquarters co-located with NORAD at Peterson. The transition in 2006 meant that the day-to-day operational mission moved from the mountain to Peterson. The screens, the operators, the battle staff, the command function, all of it relocated. Cheyenne Mountain was placed in warm standby status. This means the facility was maintained. The systems were kept operational. The blast doors could still be sealed. The springs still sat under the buildings. The water tanks still held their reserves, and the generators could still fire. But the continuous staffed operations moved to Peterson. For those who understood what Cheyenne Mountain represented and why it had been built, this was a moment of mixed feelings. The argument for the move was sound from a practical standpoint. The Peterson facility was more modern, more accessible, and better suited to the expanded mission. But the argument against it was also straightforward and serious. Peterson is not inside a mountain. Peterson does not have blast doors that weigh 25 tons. Peterson does not sit under several hundred feet of solid granite. If the reason Cheyenne Mountain was built was hardness, survivability, the ability to keep functioning when everything around it was being destroyed, then moving the primary mission to a modern but unhardened facility at Peterson represented a reduction in that survivability. The counter-argument was that the nature of the threat had changed. In 2006, the primary concern was not a massive Soviet nuclear first strike targeting American command centers. The Cold War was over. The threats had diversified. Terrorism, cyber attacks, regional conflicts, the possibility of small-scale missile launches from rogue states. These were the threats that dominated the planning environment in the mid-2000s. And for managing those kinds of threats, an efficient modern facility at Peterson was arguably more useful than a hardened Cold War bunker inside a mountain. But then the world changed again. In the mid-2010s, Russia began a significant military modernization program. New long-range missiles, new hypersonic weapons, new nuclear delivery systems designed explicitly to defeat American missile defenses. China's military power expanded dramatically. North Korea tested intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental United States. The threat picture that had seemed to recede with the end of the Cold War began to look more complicated and more dangerous again. In 2015, the commander of NORAD and USNORTHCOM, Admiral William Gortney, announced that the command was moving some of its operations back to Cheyenne Mountain. The reason he gave was direct and unambiguous. The primary concern was the electromagnetic pulse threat. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, is generated by a nuclear detonation at high altitude. When a nuclear weapon is detonated above a certain altitude, the gamma radiation it releases interacts with the Earth's atmosphere in a way that generates an enormous pulse of electromagnetic energy. That pulse can damage or destroy unshielded electronic systems over a very wide area. Computers, communication systems, power grids, vehicles with electronic ignitions, anything that relies on modern electronics could be affected by a sufficiently powerful EMP. Cheyenne Mountain was designed and built to survive an EMP. The thick granite of the mountain provides natural shielding. The facility itself incorporates electromagnetic shielding measures built into its design. Peterson Air Force Base, a modern above-ground facility, does not have that hardening. In an era when potential adversaries were developing new weapons systems specifically designed to defeat American military capabilities, the electromagnetic pulse threat made the mountain relevant again in a way that the post-Cold War period had seemed to make unnecessary. Gortney's decision to move operations back to Cheyenne Mountain was, in essence, an acknowledgement that the logic that built the facility in the first place had not become obsolete. It had simply been temporarily set aside during a period when the threat environment seemed less acute. The mountain had waited, and when the threat environment shifted, the mountain was still there, still hardened, still viable, still ready. That resilience, the ability of a facility built in the 1960s to remain relevant and important in the 21st century, is one of the most remarkable aspects of the Cheyenne Mountain story. The engineers and planners who designed it built it for permanence. They built it for the long duration. They built it to still be standing and still be useful in a world they could not specifically predict, but could broadly anticipate. They got it right. Let us talk about the people who keep this mission alive today, because they deserve to be understood, not just as operators of a sophisticated system, but as human beings doing one of the most consequential jobs on the planet. The men and women who work at Cheyenne Mountain come from across the American military services and from the Canadian Armed Forces. They are Air Force officers and enlisted personnel, Army officers, Navy personnel, Space Force Guardians, and their Canadian counterparts from the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Canadian Army. They are radar operators and missile warning specialists, and space surveillance analysts, and intelligence officers, and communications technicians, and systems engineers. They are also the support personnel, The cooks and the mechanics and the facility managers and the administrative specialists and the medical personnel who keep the people doing the primary mission healthy and functional. They work in a demanding environment that requires sustained concentration, technical proficiency, and the ability to make accurate judgments under conditions that can shift very quickly from routine to genuinely critical. They work shifts. They work nights. They work weekends and holidays. They work in a facility that, by its very design, is a constant physical reminder of the gravity of their mission, and they do it day after day, year after year, with a level of professionalism and dedication that the vast majority of the American and Canadian public will never see and almost never thinks about. There is a particular kind of service that happens in places like Cheyenne Mountain. It is not the service of the soldier in the field, visible, dramatic, physically dangerous in the direct and immediate sense. It is a different kind of service. It is the service of continuous vigilance. The service of being present, attentive, accurate, and ready. Not in a moment of crisis, but in every moment of every day, so that if a moment of crisis arrives, the response is not improvised, but executed. The people inside that mountain are not waiting for the world to end. They are working every shift to make sure it does not. Let us look at the technical systems that make the Cheyenne Mountain mission possible in its modern form, because the technology has evolved enormously since the facility first became operational in 1966, and it continues to evolve today. The modern missile warning mission relies on a layered network of sensors. At the outermost layer are the space-based infrared sensors, satellites in geosynchronous orbit that can detect the heat signature of a ballistic missile launch anywhere on Earth within seconds of the moment of launch. These satellites provide the first indication of a missile launch before any ground-based radar can see the missile, because the infrared signature of a rocket engine burning is detectable from orbit even through clouds and at intercontinental distances. The data from those satellites flows into the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in real time, where it is processed and assessed. When a launch is detected, the system generates an alert, and the battle staff begins the assessment process. Is this a real launch? A test? A civilian space launch? A false detection caused by a sensor anomaly? The assessment process is rapid, systematic, and disciplined, drawing on every available data source to characterize the launch as quickly and accurately as possible. The ground-based radar layer adds confirmation and tracking data as the missile rises above the radar horizon. Radars positioned around the periphery of North America, including systems at Thule Air Base in Greenland, at Clear Space Force Station in Alaska, and at Beale Air Force Base in California, track incoming ballistic missiles through their mid-course phase and provide the trajectory data necessary for missile defense systems to engage them. The Space Surveillance Network tracks objects in Earth orbit using a combination of dedicated space surveillance radars, optical telescopes, and data from allied nations. The catalog of tracked objects runs to tens of thousands of entries, and it is updated continuously as objects move through their orbits, decay and re-enter, or are joined by new launches. The air warning mission uses a different